Hey, what's up, guys? Simon Edwards at Pumacom here with Heatseeker Sports, bringing you another episode of Gamescript. And today we're going to be taking a look at the Cincinnati Bengals at the Cleveland Browns. Taking a look at this just to give you a little different content out there with showdowns. Some of these slates are actually pretty good. They have decent contests and nobody really covers them from a showdown perspective. This is probably going to be one of the more popular games on the slate. Not a lot of high totals on the slate this week, so I think this one is going to be probably a heavily targeted one on the main slate. We got a bunch of weapons in it, a bunch of guys with potential upside, so I would not be surprised to see this game end up pretty chalky. So we're going to take a look here. Please give us a like on the video and subscribe to our YouTube page. We're going to be doing all sorts of videos like this. We got a bunch of shorts up with recommendations for picks for the main slate this week. Short videos, about a minute long, give you 5 options at each position pretty much. We got a few of those up this week already. Probably going to add a couple more before the slate starts. But for this is Gamescript. We're going to take a look at Cincinnati at Cleveland. So let's go to that real quick. Going to go into DraftKings. You go into your showdowns. You select Cincinnati at Cleveland, and we'll pick a contest to enter here. Looks like the $10 is going to be pretty decent. It's $20,000 to first. You get some decent options with these showdown contests, like the random showdown contests. So let's go to this one and we'll walk through the game a little bit. So just to kind of set up the game, looks like Joe Burrow is a little banged up. He's been banged up this preseason. Don't know how that's going to affect him in this game, but he hasn't done very well against Cleveland lately. And the past couple years, actually, he's been pretty bad against them, and gives an opportunity to kind of focus in on Cleveland here, maybe focus in on the running game for both teams a little bit. People are going to want to jam in Chase and all these high-powered receivers that are in this game. If we focus on the running game a little bit, we can, potentially get a little bit of differentiation in there. We'll see what some of these players are projected on the main slate. We got Jamar Chase projected the highest ownership. He's coming in around 15%. And then you got guys like Njoku, who's popular on the main slate with a 13% ownership projection. And then you go down from there, Cooper. You have to go pretty far to find Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb's only a 6% ownership projection on the main slate. I don't know how that's going to be in the showdown slate, but if we're using that as kind of a gauge for how Nick Chubb might be owned in the captain for this game, it might be pretty low ownership there. And where's Mixon? Mixon is at 9% on the main slate. So he's a little bit more popular. I think people are kind of onto the potential of Cleveland. I mean, Cincinnati leaning on the run game a little bit there, but I'm liking Nick Chubb in the captain. So maybe we can try and build a script around that and hope that Nick Chubb comes in lower owned for this. So just a couple more notes. One guy who's done really well versus Cleveland, versus Cincinnati on the Cleveland side has been Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's had 3 of his most recent performances. He had 12 targets, 8 receptions, and 114 yards. I believe that was the game that he actually started with Deshaun Watson. So getting 12 targets from Watson in that game. Previous game, 4 targets, 4 receptions, 81 yards. And then another good game that he had against them was 3 targets, 2 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. So Peoples-Jones may be going a little bit under underappreciated. Like in this, I know on his ownership for the main slate, he's only at a 1% ownership. So I'm going to be using him on the main slate too, just with his history versus the Bengals. But he also has a pretty decent matchup. Looks like he might have the best matchup out of the group. He lines up mainly from well, he's basically last year he was pretty spread out between the slot, the left alignment, and the right alignment. But Cincinnati is weakest from the left alignment and the middle alignment. So that gives Peoples-Jones some good opportunity. We know that we're projecting Elijah Moore to be the slot receiver, but Donovan Peoples-Jones might spend a lot of time in the slot too. So we don't know exactly how these alignments are going to play out, but Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to be interesting in this game just based on past performances against Cleveland. On the Cincinnati side, Jamar Chase doesn't have the best matchup, with 40% of his time spent on the left alignment, and that's where Cleveland's pretty strong, and he's pretty Higgins has a pretty tough matchup too on the right alignment. It seems like Tyler Boyd might have the best matchup here in the Cincinnati side for this game, but Jamar Chase had a huge game against Cleveland last year, so I'm not overly concerned about how that's shaping up, because Chase had a 15 target, 10 reception, 119 yards, and a touchdown game against Cleveland last year in the game that he played. He was hurt in one of those matchups, but the game that he did play last year, he did really well against them. Higgins has just been kind of average against Cleveland in his last few games against them. Joe Mixon had a nice game last year with 96 yards, no touchdowns. Joe Mixon, as we were talking earlier, he's got a pretty good matchup against Cincinnati, against Cleveland. Cleveland was allowing 26 points per game to receivers last season, to running backs last season. And that sets up Joe Mixon pretty well there, on top of Joe Burrow being banged up. So we think that he might use the running back a little bit in this one. That makes Joe Mixon an interesting captain in this captain option in this too. So pretty interesting there with Joe Mixon. David Njoku, he, I believe, scored a touchdown against Cincinnati with Deshaun Watson last year. His best tight end game, I believe, came against Cleveland, Cincinnati last year. So that's pretty interesting there. Shout out to Rich Rebar for a couple notes on this one. With Watson on the field, Njoku led the Browns with 10 red zone targets last season. So Njoku was Watson's favorite red zone target, and opposing teams targeted their tight ends 25% against the Bengals last season. Those are both courtesy of Rich Rebar with Warren Sharp website. So you can get a subscription over there to find out all sorts of good nuggets from Rich Rebar. He does a good job with that stuff in his worksheet. So those are some interesting notes about these teams and some potential directions that we can go. But if we want to build a lineup that kind of is a run heavy build that kind of goes against maybe the total of this game, it's a 47 total, 47.5 total. Cincinnati is favored with 25 points. They're playing in Cleveland. Cincinnati's favored, and Joe Burrow's banged up. So he hasn't played much in the preseason at all. He got banged up pretty early in camp. So he's pretty much missed the majority of training camp and the preseason. And yet the Bengals are favored in Cleveland by a field goal. And Cleveland's defense is better this year than it was last year. They added Zadarius Smith to help give that pressure on the quarterback. And one of the games last season, Joe Burrow was sacked 5 times against Cleveland. So I think Cincinnati might be getting a little too much love in this game. I think that 47.5 total might be a little high. I would tend to lean towards the under in this game, and I would lean towards the Cleveland side, which gives us an opportunity to build a game script that might be a little different than the field, who is probably thinking that Cincinnati's just going to come in here and take this game. So let's take a look at what we can do with that. Let's put Nick Chubb in the captain. He's expensive. He might be used significantly less in the captain than he normally would. I'm going to fade Joe Burrow. I don't like his situation this week. I like Chase, though. I still like Chase. So I'm going to add him into this lineup. Going to go down a little bit. Get our guy Peoples-Jones in there. We know that he's got the good matchup as we were talking about. From here, you can go a bunch of different directions, but if we want Chubb to be the highest scoring guy and Peoples-Jones to be the highest scoring receiver in this, it's debatable whether you can want to put Deshaun Watson in there. I'm going to put Watson in here just to get a quarterback in there since I'm fading Burrow. That leaves us with $9,000 in salary, about $4,500 left per slot left. So for scrolling down here, we can start looking at things like the kickers. McPherson, he's been a stud for a couple years. We plug him in there. Let's say, they're stalling out on the Cincinnati side. They're not able to convert in the red zone, let's say, at least from a passing perspective. Let's get Chase out of here. Let's put Mixon in there because I like Mixon better in this game, I think. And that'll give us more salary to play with. That gives us 6,600. So let's say that the pass rush is working for Cleveland. They're slowing Burrow down. Burrow's leaning more on the running game, passing to Mixon and Mixon getting a decent amount of runs, stalling in the red zone. McPherson's kicking field goals. On the other side, you got Deshaun Watson. Maybe he's having the most success with Peoples-Jones. Chubb's kind of taking over the game, making things easy on Watson and his ability to get the ball to Jones. Don't forget, too, that Cincinnati, they traded their 2 safeties. So they're depleted in the secondary this year on top of Cleveland's defense being stronger. So, it opens things up a little bit more for the Cleveland side as well. That leaves us with 6,600. If we wanted to, add another wide receiver on the Cleveland side, that leaves us the option to add Elijah Moore in there. You scroll down a little bit. Tyler Boyd had that nice matchup that we saw. And if Boyd is the receiver doing the best against Cleveland, then that would fit our game script with Mixon, because maybe Boyd and Mixon are getting those short passes in the middle, and maybe those guys are kind of the focal point of the passing game in this, and then Eric McPherson hitting those field goals. So Boyd would be an interesting guy to add in there. Irv Smith, Cincinnati didn't target the tight end much last year. It was Hayden Hurst last year, and Cincinnati doesn't allow a whole lot of points to tight end, so I'm not too interested in Irv Smith, but he's an option there with that price tag. You could also put in, like one of Cleveland's, whoever the starting kicker, I believe it's Hopkins, is going to be the starting kicker. So you could go double kicker in a lineup like this. You got double kicker, you got double running back. That plays to the under as well. And then you'd have Watson and Peoples-Jones in there for some upside. Few other guys down here, like Mixon really doesn't have any competition for people taking over that third down role this season. He's got Chris Evans is I think the best guy that they've got behind him. Jerome Ford was getting some talk in the preseason, but he hasn't really been impressive. One guy that I do like is the Cedric Tillman guy. Cedric Tillman is a stud. He's looked like a stud in the preseason. He's that rookie receiver that Cleveland drafted. He's only $1,400 salary. So if you wanted to try to swap out Mixon into this lineup, you would have. Let's try that out. If we wanted to swap out Mixon for Chase, that would leave us with plenty of salary. You get a guy like Tillman. And then maybe you can, like play around with, Peoples-Jones. Maybe you want to sub him out for Amari Cooper. I like Peoples-Jones better than Cooper in this particular game setting, but you could do that because Cooper's only a couple thousand more. You could put Cooper in there over Peoples-Jones, and then you could get Tillman in there as a cheap option. See if there's any other cheap options that we like. Trenton Irwin, I think he subs in for Boyd sometimes. He had showed a couple flashes last season, but not too interested in him in this game. I think that's going a little bit too low. Yeah, so if you wanted to go cheap, David Bell was getting hyped up in the beginning of last year in the preseason, but I don't know what his situation is this year. I haven't heard a whole lot about him. So I would probably tend to stay away from David Bell in this game. I don't think we need to go that low when we got a guy like Charles Tillman that's available for $1,400. So yeah, Charles Tillman, Browns D. I wouldn't hate like trying the Browns D, like with what we were talking about with the Bengals being Burrow in particular being banged up and their offensive line just, I don't know how it's going to be this year. We'll find out. They were hurt last year, but we'll see how Cincinnati's offensive line looks starting today. If it's as bad as it was last year, like I was saying earlier, Cleveland got 5 sacks against Burrow in one of those games. So Browns, if they take a lead and the Bengals are in catch-up mode, and Burrow's getting a lot of, Cleveland's getting a lot of pressure on Burrow, and Burrow's making mistakes from being rusty, from missing the entire preseason. That's an entire possibility, and that puts the Browns in our player pool. Bengals would also be in the player pool. Not so much as the Browns, just because the Bengals are missing those 2 safeties, like we mentioned. I don't think the Bengals really improved on their defense this year. They lost their best corner to an ACL, I believe, late in the season last year. So I'm not sure what his status is. That would be something to look into. Let's see. Yeah, so I would probably go with the I would definitely go with the Browns defense over the Bengals, and I would, probably not be too high on the Bengals. Hopkins, like we talked about, probably not Irv Smith. Probably going to stay away from Irv Smith in this, but I like Boyd, like we talked about, and a few other guys too. So that's kind of the game script that I'm leaning on. I think Cleveland takes control of this game. I think that Burrow is going to struggle out of the gate with his rustiness. I think that the Bengals will lean more on Mixon in this game and potentially short passes to Tyler Boyd. And I think there is potential for Chase to do well in this game, as he's proven time and time again, and he's getting more targets. than he was in his rookie season. Last year, he got a lot more targeted, a lot more per game than he did in his rookie season. So this season, you can only see more upside in that target count. So Chase obviously is going to be interested. Not interested in Higgins. Higgins has been a little sloppy against the Browns, and Njoku is another guy that you can consider for your player pool. So hopefully that helps out with not only the game script for a showdown potential, but like if you're looking for reasons to, either fade popular players in this game in the main slate, or looking for ownership discounts on running backs who could break the slate. I like Chubb and I like Mixon. Both those guys are pretty low owned in this one. And Donovan Peoples-Jones, keep him in mind on your main slate as well, because Peoples-Jones has done pretty well against Cleveland in the past. And I would not be surprised to see him have a decent game in here, and he's pretty cheap on the main slate. So just keep those guys in mind, and good luck with your contests. And subscribe to us at Heatseeker Sports on Twitter, Heatseeker Sports on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe there. We're going to be having Gamescript shows throughout the season, as well as a bunch of YouTube shorts with recommendations on players. And make sure to check us out tonight for the Sunday night football game. We're going to be putting up a game script for that a little bit later on when I have a chance to look at that game. So good luck, everybody, and we will see you next time, I guess, later on today.